Hello and welcome to the Game Theory Podcast. I'm your host, Sam Vecenie. Today, we're going live for the start of NBA free agency. We're going to talk a little bit about the Dejounte Murray deal over the weekend to start. And then as deals break, we will talk about them as they happen. But first, let's hit the music.
They do have a timeout. Decide not to use it. Way downtown.
Bang! Bang! What's this gonna be? Wow! Are you kidding me?
Hello and welcome to the Game Theory Podcast. I'm your host, Sam Vecenie. But if you watch the tape, what you will see completely orchestrated this game. Bryce, what's going on, buddy?
What's up, Sam? How are you? I kind of realized we do all this work for the NBA draft. We do 7 hours of NBA draft coverage. And then you wake up Friday morning and nobody gives a shit anymore. They just move on to other stuff. They want their NBA free agency. They want trades. Maybe we can talk about it when Summer League comes around, but they're over it already. They don't care.
Yeah, it's interesting. There is that little 2-week break where it feels like people just start to care about free agency, and then Summer League comes, and then everyone's all rookie crazy again. So that's why we're not going to do a draft wrap up podcast. We're just going straight into free agency because that's just kind of the reality of what we have to do. And part of the reason for that is just the condensed schedule this year. So obviously, the draft just fell on a bit of a later date. I think it fell on the 26th or 27th or whatever, which meant that there's 3 days basically until free agency. And we have all these crazy things happening. But the thing is that I needed 2 days off after the draft. I wrote, I think 16,000 words after we finished podcasting the second day of the draft. So we podcasted for 3 hours and then I wrote 16,000 words to get draft grades up on The Athletic. You can go read those. Those are all up. I talked about everything that every team did at the NBA draft in general, just thoughts on every single team's draft. Very high on the Jazz, very high on what the Lakers did with Dalton Connect. Who else? I really liked what Houston did, getting Reed Shepherd and AJ Griffin. Everything else you can go read over at The Athletic, and maybe we'll talk about it at a little bit of a later date in the future. Okay. Next, let's talk about free agency. The first thing that happened this weekend that I thought was a big precursor to free agency was the Dejounte Murray trade over to the New Orleans Pelicans. So that deal was Dejounte Murray to the New Orleans Pelicans from the Atlanta Hawks for Dyson Daniels, Larry Nance Jr., and 2 first-round picks. One of those is the 2025 Lakers pick that will transfer next season. And then the other one is the 2027 Milwaukee or New Orleans pick, and it's the worst of those 2 picks. So it's not that one is almost certain, I would say, to not be a lottery pick, barring things going incredibly, incredibly wrong for those 2 teams. I would say the Lakers pick is in all likelihood not a lottery pick. It's not impossible that it ends up somewhere in that 10 to 14 range if things would really break wrong for the Lakers next year, injuries go crazy, things like that. But I would say that pick does not project to be a lottery pick next season at least. So essentially you're getting Dyson Daniels, a really good player that I think is going to continue to grow and mature as a particularly elite defensive player in the NBA, 2 solid-ish first-round picks, and Larry Nance, who helps you with versatility on your roster, as well as gives you a real trade chip, I think, for this summer or this spring again, if you want to move him on, if you decide you want to go in a different direction. For Dejounte Murray, who really helps your organization, my immediate reaction was just value-wise, this seemed like the exact value of what Dejounte Murray in my mind was worth. A non-all-star, but exceedingly high-level point guard who is probably a top, right around the 8 to 10 mark, point guard in the NBA, probably right around 10 in terms of where he ranks among point guards in the league. Getting him for this value seems right. What was your immediate reaction to this deal?
Yeah, I mean, I think that probably the fact I didn't have overwhelming thoughts one way or the other means that I thought it was like normal value. Okay, this is essentially 3 first-round picks, however you want to consider Dyson Daniels, but the 2 first-round picks, like you said, they're not home run first-round picks. And then Dyson Daniels, good young player, especially on the defensive end, could really provide value for Atlanta defending on the wing. Larry Nance Jr. makes some sense if you're going to move on from Capella. Now he can play some of those minutes at the 5 with Onyeka Okongwu. So it made sense. I thought that I'm pretty sure EJ Liddell was in this trade as well. I don't think it was initially reported that way. Am I mistaken there?
No, you're right. You're right.
Okay.
You're right.
EJ Liddell as well. For the Pelicans, again, because the value wasn't some like knock me out of my seat, like the Mikal Bridges, or me being surprised that Josh Giddey could return Alex Caruso, or Denny Avdia was worth 2 first round picks in a couple seconds. I immediately went to, what does this mean for each team? So first, for the Pelicans, Sam, what happened a couple hours ago becomes very fascinating, because they just lost Jonas Valanciunas after trading Larry Nance. And I love Yves Missi, but like neither of us think he's coming in and playing 30 minutes, let alone 20 minutes a night as a rookie. Then my next thought now is, what does this mean for CJ? What does this mean for BI? Do they intend to play all of these guys together in New Orleans? Or is there another move coming with one of those guys? Would CJ move to the bench? And I started to try to figure out, what does this mean for kind of those core group of players in New Orleans, and how do they fit together?
Yeah. So my immediate reaction when I saw this was that it seems like it's the precursor to a Brandon Ingram trade. I said probably in late May, I guess, that if you made me project one player that I felt like would be in all likelihood dealt this summer, it'd probably be Brandon Ingram, just because it feels like they need to go in a different direction. He has 1 year left on his contract. Given what their success has been so far, I don't think you can extend him, just kind of point blank. Like I don't love the idea of just giving him a bunch of money. Now, the complicating factor there, from what I understand, is that new general manager of the New Orleans Pelicans, Bryson Graham, he's a very big fan of Brandon Ingram. And I think he is not inclined to just like move Brandon Ingram immediately. Like he wants if he's going to move him, he wants a really good deal. Obviously, David Griffin is the lead front office voice there in New Orleans, but Bryson Graham being elevated, I would imagine, makes it so that it is not necessarily fait accompli that Brandon Ingram will move now. Not to say that like Trajan Langdon didn't like Brandon Ingram or anything. I'm just saying that I do know and have been told by very like reliable people that Bryson is a big fan of Brandon Ingram. So what does that mean now? That means to me, if you're going to go out and you're going to get Dejounte Murray really does love to operate in those like mid-rangey areas, let's say. Like that's where he loves to thrive. That's also where Brandon Ingram just like really likes to thrive, right? I don't think you can have both of those guys on the court together consistently along with Zion and expect that middle of the court for Zion is going to be all that well spaced. I know that Dejounte has really improved as a 3-point shooter, and I think he deserves credit for that. He made 36% of his threes this year, taking 7 of them per game. The problem is that even with that, he still ends up taking so many difficult shots that he's still not all that wildly efficient. I think that this season, his true shooting percentage was, what was it? It was 4% below league average. The year before that, it was 7% below league average, right? So Dejounte does some things well. He's really creative. The Pelicans desperately needed somebody who could go get a shot at the end of a shot clock. And he is somebody that is fearless in terms of doing that. I like going to get him if I'm the Pelicans. To me, though, it has to correspond now with a Brandon Ingram trade. And realistically, I think it has to correspond with a Brandon Ingram trade that goes and gets you a center.
Sure.
And the construction that I've been wondering about now, and this is speculation, do not say that this is reporting. I've been wondering, given the Brook Lopez rumors that have been bandied about this summer, could you do something along the lines of Brandon Ingram for Brook Lopez in like Pat Connaughton's contract or something like that?
That's an awesome fit in New Orleans with Brook Lopez stretching the floor for Zion at the 5 position. That's really nice. Yeah, I mean, my thing with BI is obviously Dejounte is going to want to play with ball in hand. Zion, we've talked about the point Zion thing. He's going to, how much is left for BI to do unless he kind of, you stagger minutes and then he's running the second unit. But I kind of would want to do that with Dejounte and Zion to an extent as well. I do think CJ is just better suited playing as a spot up guy and can be really effective there. And then you want to get some of these defenders in the starting lineup also between Herb Jones and Murphy. And so it makes even more sense. I think there was also a report that came out today, or I saw a tweet. I shouldn't say report, but that, maybe Sacramento wasn't interested in Brandon Ingram. Now that doesn't solve their center position issues with that trade, but you can bring in that and then figure it out from there. I don't know what the construction of that would look like. So I think it makes sense. We've talked about BI on the move anyway, but that was where my initial thought was that a CJ, Dejounte, BI, Zion, and then whoever at center. You're right. The thing that makes sense is using BI to go get that center now. That makes the most sense because there's not a center in free agency. I mean, we've seen nothing with Hartenstein to New Orleans. I don't feel like. I mean, that doesn't mean it's not possible.
He's too expensive at this point.
Yeah. It does. Really it doesn't make sense. He can't get there. Yeah, it's stupid. My fault. So that can't happen. And so, using BI for a center makes a ton of sense.
Yeah, that's just like the name Brook Lopez came to my mind just because both of them have been bandied about in trade rumors, not because, I think that that's a even deal 1-for-1. Like if I'm the Bucks, I think I probably have to add to that in some way, shape or form, right? In order to get Brandon Ingram over to Milwaukee. And I don't even know if I'm Milwaukee, if I'm real excited about Brandon Ingram either necessarily, but if you could do some sort of like 3-team construction, maybe Sacramento send stuff over to the Bucks where it's like, Sacramento moves Harrison Barnes and Kevin Huerter over to the Bucks. Brook Lopez and Pat Connaughton go to New Orleans, and then Brandon Ingram goes to Sacramento or something like that. And again, I don't think this is a good idea for Milwaukee. I want to be clear to people. If I'm them, I'm just keeping Brook Lopez because I think Brook Lopez is a good basketball player. But it just has seemed very clear to me, based on the reporting, let's say, that, there seems to be some disconnect between Brook Lopez and the Milwaukee Bucks right now.
I just don't know what the Bucks would do at the big man position then. If
that's also my question.
All of a sudden now they're in the New Orleans situation where they have Bobby Portis, Tyler Smith, I like long-term as a stretch guy, but there's not a whole lot of defense in the two names I just threw out.
And Shane brings up a good point in the comments. Like Milwaukee's hard capped the second apron if they move Lopez and Pat together. That's true. So you can't even really do that given the way that their roster is allocated. They'd have to make like a corresponding move, probably involving Chris Middleton, honestly. So the whole thing is just complicated beyond belief. But from New Orleans, you have now a lineup that their best lineup to me is probably Dejounte Murray, CJ McCollum, Herb Jones, Trey Murphy, and Zion.
Yeah.
Or it's, Dejounte Murray, Herb Jones, Trey Murphy, Zion, and a center.
Yeah.
Right. This move here is just going to be it has to be a corresponding Brandon Ingram move. I'm not totally sure where it makes sense. It just has to happen at some point here. This is where we have to go.
Yep.
Next, going to the Atlanta side of this deal. Atlanta basically got back like 85% of the value that they moved originally for Dejounte Murray, on top of having Dejounte Murray for 2 years and getting the commensurate value that he gave them then. I think this is about as good of a deal as they could have hoped for to get off of Dejounte Murray. I personally really like the Dyson Daniels fit with either Kobe Buffkin or Trae Young long-term. Playing, you need 3 guards, 4 guards. You need multiple players. You need multiple bodies, right? That's a huge piece of this. You need just a lot of different iterations that you can throw out there. And honestly, all 3 of them can probably play together because Dyson is so big that you can have them guard like 3s and 4s pretty easily too. So if I'm them, I love the like chess piece acquisition of Dyson Daniels. I don't know how many people like have watched him like at a super high level. He is an incredible defender.
Mhm.
He is an all defense caliber defender. If his offense lets him get on the court, that's the key. He has to make it so the offense gets on the court, and it's going to require him working on his jumper. He really just needs to be a capable shooter and continuing to be smart in terms of cutting, being able to play off of, the second side. He's always been a really sharp pick and roll passer and playmaker, but the jumper is what has to come. That's the really big key here. Guys improve as they get older as shooters. That's just the reality. Dyson Daniels is a really hard worker. I can't imagine a world where he doesn't at least get to a 35% level as a standstill 3-point shooter. The problem is that good enough? I don't know that that's like quite good enough to be like a serious impact player necessarily. You would need him to be like a little bit more than that, maybe to be a real capable starter. But I think that at the very least, he projects as like a high end 25-minute per game defensive chess piece, as long as he gets to like that reasonable level as a shooter.
Well, and what the Hawks did over a 2-day span was they've added some real defensive potential with young players in Daniels, and quite honestly, Vecenie as well. Like, I don't think he's that type of like on-ball defender, but we talk about length, especially positional length. We talk about ground coverage. That's something that Vecenie hopefully will do, along with, being able to knock down shots. So if this is kind of the long-term build here, assuming they still are going to build around Trey, is you added some defenders, and then if they're able to space the floor enough, and that's my initial reaction where the Hawks got worse here, and I think it would be hard to argue otherwise, but as somebody brought up, like, this whole Trey Dejounte thing wasn't working anyway. So now we get back to Trey as the engine of the offense. I don't know what other else moves they're going to make here. I assume they still sell off on Capella. I don't know about Bogdanovich, but I still think they took a step back, but I think they had to. Like, they weren't going to keep building forward with these two guys. And to your point, I think it's easy to say, well, they gave up 4 picks for Dejounte. They only get 2 and a good player on a rookie contract back. But like you said, they did get 2 years out of Dejounte. I think people who will question the value of this trade will be comparing it to the market we've seen thus far of what Mikal Bridges brought, of what Deni Avdija brought, of those type of things. And that's not always fair. Like, it just, all of these trades happen just a little bit different based off leverage and value and how many teams are in and those type of things.
Yeah, no question. And just like, frankly, I think Mikal Bridges is a more valuable player than Dejounte Murray. Like, I know the counting stats will say differently or whatever, but Mikal Bridges is an all defense caliber defender who can also go out and occasionally run some offense and help you. I do think this is a big, this is a smart move for Atlanta. And to me, what immediately stood out is, I'm glad you brought up the Vecenie thing, right? The guys that they're trying to put around Trey Young now, they all have something in common. They're just very big and long and rangy, right?
Yep.
Dyson Daniels is like a 6'7", 6'8", like high level defender. Vecenie is like a 6'9" to 6'10", like perimeter-ish player who can shoot. Jalen Johnson's obviously like their main key cog that they see next to Trey long-term. 6'8", like super at high level athlete, great transition player, right? Onyeka Okongwu is like an athletic big man on some level, right? Like there are just so many different ways that they're very clearly trying to build around Trey, and they're trying to put so many bigger, longer Kobe Buffkin, like 6'5", like, combo guard, like a bigger body, right? They're just trying to throw so many different guys there, it feels like. And I think that this is the smart way to build around Trey Young if you're going to do it. But more than that, it's also a really smart way to pivot if you're going to move out of the Trey Young business. And I don't really want to talk about that right now. That feels like a totally different conversation. Maybe they do, maybe they don't, who knows, right? But I think that if you're going to move forward as an organization, having as many versatile players at the end of the day makes it easier to pivot kind of across the board. And the downside of the earlier Dejounte deal is that Atlanta does not have its picks moving forward.
Yep.
And that means that it's going to be really hard for them over the next 3 years to full scale tank. But because now you have all these versatile players, maybe you can go and get a star in some regard other than Trae Young, if you want to decide to move Trae Young, and then, make decisions off of that. But, that's kind of, I think that if you had to move Dejounte, I don't think that you were going to, at the end of the day, get better than this. So you might as well just do this.
Yep. No, I'm with you. I said I didn't feel strongly one way or the other about value like I had some of the other moves. So I immediately thought, okay, what does this mean for New Orleans? What's the next moves? What does this mean for Atlanta? Do I like it? What does it mean? And so I think we hashed all of that out in terms of that stuff. I think the value, again, if you separate the other stuff, the value seems right for Dejounte Murray.
The last point I will say here, I would not be totally stunned if this turns into some like weird. So this deal will either go through today or it will like go through later in July. And if it does go through later in July, I would imagine it becomes like some weird 3-team conglomeration, just in order to make the money work and everything. But that's like a totally different conversation. Jonas Valanciunas is signed with the Washington Wizards. That's a name that like they could rope into this, rope the Wizards in, kind of try and make the money work that way across the board. There are just some different iterations and options that they can do in order to do that. And one reason why that is, if I remember correctly now in the new CBA, is you can actually acquire players via trade into your exceptions, like into your like non-taxpayer and your taxpayer MLE and things like that, which makes it like a little bit easier to kind of facilitate moves in that respect. So, okay. The big thing the Pelicans need, though, is a center. They have to go find an answer to their center problem because Yves Missi is not it first year. He can play maybe 15 minutes a night, but first year it's going to take some time for him to be ready to do that. Okay. The next biggest piece of news that has actually happened today is Kentavious Caldwell-Pope.
Yeah, sure.
So the Kentavious Caldwell-Pope contract is 3 years, $66 million with a player option to go to Orlando. I kind of like alluded to, Orlando as a real landing spot. I think like earlier last week as an idea for, how they could go about continuing to build this roster. I really think that this is about as perfect a fit as you're going to find for Orlando. I always really liked either Malik Monk or Kentavious Caldwell-Pope into this like $25 million of cap space that Orlando has. This is a home run to me for them to go get KCP. It's a perfect fit for what Orlando is building. And on top of it, the one thing you and I have talked about a lot is if you're going to build around Paulo and Franz, I like putting the ball in their hands more often.
Yes.
This is a perfect player type as a 3-and-D like wing who is not going to require a ton of usage, but is incredibly valuable off the ball, that ticks that box and makes this is how they hit the highest upside of their potential as an organization.
Yeah, I agree. I saw a lot of people push back real quick, like, oh, I guess this means they're not going to sign a point guard. And what are they going to do at point guard? And I guess maybe I'm just bought into Paolo and Franz doing that a little bit more than other people are. I mean, I guess I can understand them wanting a true point guard, but we've talked about this. I love Malik Monk, but I think KCP is a better fit in terms of, Monk would have given you some more on-ball juice and more passing juice, but have fun trying to score on the perimeter against Jalen Suggs and Kentavious Caldwell-Pope. And so, not to mention then Franz is linked and Paolo is a weak side helper and those type of things, as hopefully his defense will continue to grow. So I like this. I think this is, to me, unless you were just going to get a straight absolute bucket, somebody that's getting you 25 a night or something, you're going to trade for Anthony Simons or something like that. I like this in terms of free agency, who was available between the KCPs, the Gary Trent Juniors, if Monk would have became of it. I like this for Orlando because of kind of the culture and what I think they want to be as a team, which is this real tough, hard-nosed defensive team. And I think that's a great point, Sam. you're not limiting the upside of Franz and Paolo and even Jalen Suggs playing with the ball in his hands and putting, having somebody else with the ball 50% of the time. Now your young guys can still grow in those roles, and you have a perfect complement to what they do in free agency. I think, and the number seems right. Like, he's a champion. He's proven he fits nicely. Like, this is the contract those type of guys get. So I like this. I think it was a really good signing by Orlando.
I think it's a great signing as well. I think it makes an immense amount of sense for them. If they're going to grow as an organization, it's going to be behind empowering Paulo and Franz and continuing to allow them to grow into being the great on-ball players that I think they're both capable of being. I think they're both going to be all-stars within the next 2 years at the very least. Paulo already is, but I think Franz is going to hit that status within the next 2 years at least. The other guy here that I'm really intrigued by is Jalen Suggs. This is a big bet on Jalen Suggs to me. I am interested almost more than any player in that 2020, what would that be? 2022, 2020, 2021 draft class. That would be the 2021 draft class. I am more interested in what Jalen Suggs gets as an extension than any other player in that class right now. Because we've seen guys that are elite on defense tend to get undervalued in some respect as those contracts kind of tend to go. To me, Jalen Suggs, I'm looking at the Immanuel Quickley deal. I'm looking at the Tyler Hero deal. I'm looking at the Jordan Poole deal. I'm saying I am a better player than, realistically, I think all three of those players. I think Jalen Suggs projects to be a better player than them. I think he is a better player than them. And if I'm Jalen Suggs, I'm sitting here saying I want $30 to $35 million a year. And if I'm Orlando, like, that feels aggressive to me because, and we're going to talk about the Quickley deal in a second here, like, those two of those contracts have not gone particularly well. I'd even argue Hero's contract has not gone great. Certainly the Poole deal has not gone great.
Yep.
The Quickley deal, I think, that's a very big number to be paying him. But again, if I'm Wasserman and I'm, Jalen Suggs' representation, I'm sitting here going, that's what I'm worth. So that negotiation during this extension process, I think, is going to be really interesting to watch, because I would imagine that it ends with a number where everybody's happy, but it's at least 120 to me for Suggs if I'm looking at the way that guard market has gone now.
Yeah, he's an all defensive level defender who jumped to almost, essentially 40% from three on 5 attempts. That's crazy value. I realize, maybe you want more from the passing. Maybe you would want, that's a lot though. You talk about a 3-and-D guard. That's big time stuff there. If he really shoots at that level, and then he's one of the better point of attack perimeter defenders in the NBA. I'm with you. I would, if I'm Orlando, that's tough for me to swallow right now for a guy who averaged, 12.5 points per game and is at best your third option on offense at best. But if he can be that, if he can uptick that a little bit, stay consistent with the shooting, that's probably where he's going to be. Cause what was Quickley's is 35 average annual value. Gosh dang. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. This is where we're at, right? This is where we're at with contracts.
The reality of where we're at, truly.
We have to start wrapping our heads around this stuff.
And it's why Orlando had to use this summer to get better, because the money is coming. Franz Wagner's deal, is probably going to be a max. Because again, Franz Wagner is definitely better. If you want to equivocate between Immanuel Quickley and Jalen Suggs, I understand it. I would definitely take Suggs, but if you want to say Quickley, I'm not going to sit here and fight with you about it. Franz Wagner is definitely better than these guys. Franz is going to get a max. And now you have Suggs who's going to get a max. I just think, man, it's going to be interesting. It's going to be really, really interesting, guys. See what it looks like there. But this is a big deal for Orlando. And I think this is how you just have to continue to grow this thing. You have to do it organically, and you have to hope that you drafted the guys. And realistically, I think that they have. Like I really, really like all of these guys in the NBA right now. Okay. The other side of this is the Denver Nuggets. The Denver Nuggets are basically letting KCP walk here on a number that I don't know, man. Like to me, this number is not catastrophic.
Yeah.
Like $22 million is actually kind of a little bit less than I thought KCP was going to end up getting, especially if you start the deal. I don't know how the Orlando Magic have structured this deal. Given that there's a player option, I wouldn't be stunned if they've structured it to where he gets money up front and then it descends. Like that's like really possible to me, but I don't know how they've structured it. Maybe the money up front like could have been a differentiator if that's the way they structured it. I don't know. But this seems like an eminently matchable contract that Denver is just letting walk out the door. If there's any team in the league, in my opinion, that should be paying the second apron right now, it's Denver. You should feel like you have the guys. You've already proven that you have the guys. You have Jokic, you have Murray, you have the best starting five, in my opinion, in the NBA. You just need to go out and find depth and hit a home run on the depth. But if there's any team in the league that should be willing to pay the second apron stuff, I get that these restrictions are incredibly onerous on how you have to go about building your team once you end up going into that second apron. I just do not see how you can't end up paying like $375 for KCP. I just don't. Like, I think that they should have, even if they, so like the tax situation in Florida is a differentiator as well. Obviously, you know, in Florida, your state taxes are a little bit lower. So money goes a little bit further for free agents in Florida than it does in Denver, for instance. But man, like if I'm Denver, I feel like I got to go into the second apron to keep this group because I know that it can win a title. I've seen it already.
Yeah. No, it's hard to figure out what they're doing here, what the long-term plan is. What does this mean? Like, do they think that, you know, are they anticipating the paying of Aaron Gordon? Obviously, we saw them pay Jamal Murray. What, you know, do they just don't feel like they can have 5 different guys all making that level of money between Jokic? Like I say, Murray got the deal. Porter's about to get close to 40 after this next year. Aaron Gordon is going to look for his extension. And it was just like, hey, we got to keep flexibility. But it's, how are you going to replace this? Because we've talked about this. It's not even, and I think this is still a question, it's not just about, is Christian Braun able to do what KCP does? Even if you think he can, who's going to do what Christian Braun did? And who's going to do what Bruce Brown and Christian Braun have done over the last couple years? Is it Peyton Watson? Now you're relying on rookie Deron Holmes, second-year players that we didn't see anything from in their first years. You know, like, who is it going to be? And if I'm not mistaken, I think they're still a little bit over the tax. Like, they still have to do a little bit to get under to even get to their full mid-level. And then, like, can you sign that guy that is, who is that, I guess, would make this feel a little more, I could handle a little bit more once I found out who that guy is. Who's the guy they can bring in to replace things? I know there's already the Russ stuff, and you know, that would be via trade, but they need somebody else. Like, I want to see what the next move is, because they need a wing, Sam. They need a 3-and-D wing, because all of a sudden the spacing on this team is really questionable. When you talk about Christian Braun, who's not a high volume guy, Peyton Watson didn't play in the playoffs because of it. And if it's trade for Russ, he doesn't space the floor. Like, all of a sudden, Jokic is amazing, but where is all the spacing going to come from around anybody outside of Jamal and MPJ?
It is a significant bet on Christian Braun and Peyton Watson improving as shooters.
Yep.
It is a serious bet on those two things. And to me, it's just like not a bet that I would feel wildly comfortable making unless I have a backup. Like, maybe, you know, for instance, you know, Derek Reynolds brings up, what if they go after Clay? I mean, you can try, but with what? Like, that's kind of the question, right? Like, is Golden State going to help you facilitate like a sign and trade because they can't, like, they're not going to be over the second apron. Like, they're going to be able to sign and trade if they want. But like, yeah, I just this feels tough. Michael Guzman brings up a name that we brought up in our Denver offseason preview, Gary Harris. Sure, like I'm for that. I think Gary Harris makes some sense to bring back. Bruce Brown just had his option picked up for $23 million. I don't really think that he is a real option there. Obviously, their recent draft picks, Deron Holmes, Julian Strother, Hunter Tyson, those three are like, at the very least, Tyson and Strother are very real shooters. That might be where they're expecting a bit of a leap in terms of the floor spacing, but it's a big bet. It's a big bet on youth in Denver right now. In my opinion, I would have liked to have seen Denver make that bet on youth while also maintaining who they have already.
So that's the thing, right?
You want to give those guys like a bit of a fallback net if things don't go well.
Yeah, you've invested in all of these draft. Like, I even kind of like a couple of the undrafted free agents they got in PJ Hall and Trey Alexander. I thought those were great pickups for them. Obviously, not all of these guys are going to hit, but I think that's to the point here is you feel better about having to rely on those guys and the roles that would be asked of them if you still had this really tight sound starting five, and then all they have to do is be bench players around a Christian Brown and a second year of playing Peyton Watson. And, if you want to bring in Russ or whatever, DeAndre Jordan's back as well. Now those guys can just, you don't need as many of them. They can just fill specific roles. Now you're really betting on them. But again, maybe like I tend to wait to judge these things too harshly until I see what the final domino is. Because if there is, if they facilitate a Clay or somehow or whatever, now I'm more of an appetite for that. Things can make a little more sense. Right now, though, there's some major holes. Even if you think Christian Brown is good enough to be a starter, what's that second unit look like? How are they going to fill that thing out?
So we have another fun signing here that we'll talk about live, just like as it happened. Naji Marshall is going to Dallas.
No, we don't. This is awesome for Dallas. As somebody who talks about the Detroit Pistons, this was my favorite potential free agent signing for Detroit. And so, yeah, this is awesome for Dallas. This is a great.
Yeah,
great
Naji
signing.
Marshall. Yeah, over the last 2 years, has averaged like 8 points, 4 rebounds, and 2 assists per game. This year took a big leap as a shooter, was at 39% from three, has always been like a pretty good 79, 80% free throw shooter, something in that ballpark. So there is some reason to believe that like the number this year could have been genuine improvement. It is like a direct replacement for Derrick Jones Jr.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
This is an easy, like for like situation. And honestly, I think that Naji is a little bit better than Derrick Jones Jr. Honestly, I think he just has a little bit more game offensively as a slasher, as a, overall playmaker. I think he's a little bit more dangerous with the ball in his hands. He's a little bit worse defensively than Derrick Jones Jr. So I think that this is like a perfect, hey, let's make sure that this works. Let's get somebody in the door. Let's not wait for Derrick Jones Jr. We're going to get Naji Marshall. We're going to lock him in for 3 years on a number that, man, 327. I think that number is going to look awesome for Naji Marshall.
Yeah, this is an awesome contract. I think you're right. I know we just came off watching Derrick Jones Jr. be a really important piece of a Dallas Mavericks run to the NBA Finals. So I feel bad saying this, but I think, Naji Marshall's fine with me here as a replacement for that. In the last few days, we've seen this team double down on what potential 3-and-D type of wings with the Quentin Grimes trade. They move off a player who barely played for them in the playoffs anyway. They get a young player with some injury history, had a down year, buying low on him a little bit. They sent out 3 second-round picks along with Tim Hardaway Jr. So it wasn't just like completely, asset free. But if Grimes gets right and back to that second year with New York, that's a great addition to this roster. Naji Marshall can slide right into that role that Derrick Jones Jr. had. I like what Dallas has done so far with this. And, it makes sense. All three things they've really done, even the draft pick that I know I'm a little higher on than you. It's a second round pick. It's years down the road. Doesn't matter right now, but it's about 3-and-D guys surrounding Luka, Kyrie, and their big man in the middle. Yeah. It makes complete sense.
Yeah, no, this is a great bet. And look, it seemed very clear that the Pelicans were probably not going to retain Naji Marshall. They just have so many of these guys that if I was Naji, I would probably want to get out of there and get an opportunity to play somewhere else. You brought up the Quentin Grimes deal. You know, they get off of the Tim Hardaway Jr. money. The goal there was to have access to their non-taxpayer mid-level in order to either retain Derek Jones or go get somebody like Naji Marshall. Obviously, Tim Hardaway Jr., 3 second-round picks to Detroit for Quentin Grimes. I mean, what was your reaction to that move whenever you saw that in the door from the Pistons perspective?
Yeah. The other thing is that created a trade exception for the Mavericks as well. I saw that could be a mechanism for them getting Klay Thompson and then the money. And I don't know how this changes things with the Marshall signing, but you know, at one point the money for Klay with Dallas was a little bit more. My initial reaction was I didn't like it from the Pistons perspective. I think Quentin Grimes is the type of player, the idea of who he is makes complete sense with the defense. I understand getting 3 second-round picks. I do think Tim Hardaway Jr. provides value to a Pistons team that needs volume floor spacing and in some sense just a volume scorer to not force guys into that role like Asar Thompson, Ron Holland as a rookie. So I think Tim Hardaway Jr. can provide value to this team, especially if it's who he was the first 4 months of last season, where quite frankly, Sam, he was probably 6th man of the year up until he went on just, you know, a cold streak to finish off the year in the playoffs. But I just hate selling on a 3-and-D archetype like Grimes. So it makes me wonder, injuries, did they not want to pay him what they thought maybe he was going to be at? And everybody should know, the guy that acquired Quentin Grimes in the trade at the deadline is not the decision maker in Detroit now. And so I can't even judge the overall process because it was between 2 different GMs. And if Trajan didn't see Grimes as a fit for this roster for whatever reason, then he probably needed to go ahead and move on and get what he could for him.
Yeah, I'm just very confused by that. I guess like maybe Trajan just like does not see Quentin as a shooter at the end of the day. And that's why he felt like he needed to do this. You obviously go and you get a shooter in Tim Hardaway Jr. that maybe can play some minutes next year in the regular season. And you get these 3 additional second-round picks. Sure. Maybe you don't want to pay Quentin Grimes the number that he's going to get. Maybe you had initial conversations with Quentin Grimes' representation and you decided the number was just not going to be right. Sure. Okay. Look, I would have kept Quentin instead of this deal, but I'm not going to crush them too hard, if only because the one thing I've been saying for this Pistons team is they just desperately need shooters.
Yeah.
I would imagine Simone Fontecchio is going to re-sign there. Yeah. You know, obviously now you have Tim Hardaway Jr. Just having like bodies who can space. It doesn't change my opinion that like their young core pieces, they have too many non-shooters with the guys that they're trying to build around long-term. But surrounding those players with shooters is the best way to help them thrive in some way. So, you know, I can't crush them for it at the end of the day. The last thing here is we need to note that, you know, you brought this up a minute ago. It does feel like Dallas is trying to do some sort of sign and trade with Klay Thompson. We will see if they're able to get down that road and figure out a world where that works for everybody involved. They have, you know, a number of different mechanisms that they can use to be able to do that if such a eventuality occurs.
It sounds like Klay is them, Philly, and the 2 LA teams, right? Is the 4 teams he's meeting with. I think I have the 4 teams correct.
Yeah. We'll see what that looks like. I just like, don't, you know, I have no idea what to expect with the Klay Thompson thing. Yep. Like I still find it so hard to believe that the relationship between him and Golden State is so irreparably broken that like the numbers that are being tossed about for Klay Thompson, like in the 12 to $15 million range, that like he's not going to go back there. Yeah. And do that, or that he's not, or at least like give them a chance to match, or like it just feels so crazy to me that we're at this point. But yeah, I don't know what to expect from that whole deal right now. While you're here, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. Really helps us grow the channel over on YouTube. Hit the subscribe button on the podcast feed. If this is the first time you're listening on the podcast feed, do all that. It'd be great. Really helps support the show. But now we're going to move on and talk about Chris Paul to the San Antonio Spurs.
Love it.
Chris Paul, 1 year, $11 million. to the Spurs. I love this deal.
I love it too.
I think that this is a fantastic decision from the Spurs. Go get like a real tried and true point guard to help Victor Wembanyama grow and mature and help these younger, wing players get more opportunities to, grow their game in some way, shape, and form. If you really want to play Steph Castle at point, there's nobody to help him like learn from better than Chris Paul. I love this. Like, not only that, but he helps lift their floor every night that he plays across the board with how he's able to keep things in, just general, just like order, right? He keeps everything together all at once on the court. He's a perfect floor general. This is a home run. Like this is like a 1 year, $11 million deal. But like, this is probably my favorite thing I've seen so far in free agency is just Chris Paul going there.
Yeah. I mean, I don't care whether the Spurs are good or not. I don't have anything with Chris Paul. Like, I definitely smiled when I saw this come across the notifications though. I was like, this is perfect. All year, what did we scream about, Sam? Just put a real point guard on the floor with Victor Wembanyama. And like you said, what's nice about this is because we talked about, hey, let's let Steph Castle figure this out a little bit. There's a 1 year, maybe 2 years here where they can experiment with this thing. Bringing in Chris Paul doesn't affect that. Like, I feel like if Chris Paul is signed with San Antonio Spurs, he knows what he's signing up for, Sam. It's not like he got traded there. It's not like he signed somewhere and then they traded off all the other good players. He's going to San Antonio knowing what his job is, which is to be the veteran, the leader in the room, bring a young Steph Castle, help try to make Vic as good as he possibly can, whatever that means in terms of playing with a veteran point guard who knows the nuances of this game better than anybody. And then if Steph is way better on ball than what he thought, then Chris Paul, I bet, will be very willing to go play off ball a little bit if that's what he needs to do. So what I love is it's not a 28-year-old point guard who's going to step on the toes of anybody's growth. He is there for one reason, and that's to grow the young players. And having somebody like this helps you figure out who these guys are. It just helps you evaluate them so much better than if you don't have a player like this. I think it's a great deal. 1 year is $11 million. It's a 1 year deal. Like, I don't even care if people say, oh, Chris Paul's not worth $11 million. I don't care. Like, it's 1 year. They had cap space. It doesn't matter.
Yeah. Go give them the money. See what you've got. Like this, like you said, this guy will help you evaluate and figure out, okay, what is Jeremy Sohan at this point? Okay. What is Devin Vassell, right? Devin Vassell doesn't have to have the ball in his hands as much anymore now. Maybe, Vassell will be able to show some growth on defense a little bit more where, I remember, I don't know if you loved him on defense at Florida State, but I thought he was quite good on defense at Florida State this year, or like throughout the course of his NBA career, through his first 4 years, he hasn't been, right? And the other thing is that like nobody's expecting the Spurs to be some top 6 seed in the playoffs next year, be in the mix for the finals, right? If Chris Paul misses games here and there to like let his body rest and recover, who cares? Like this is a perfect situation for him. It's a perfect situation for everybody involved. Even if he has to miss like 20 games because he gets a soft tissue injury again, it's not like he's tanking a team's playoff hopes. He's still going to be around. He's still going to be able to help these guys grow and mature at the end of the day. I think this is a great fit. The thing that I didn't love that the Spurs did was they let Dom Barlow hit unrestricted free agency by not offering him a qualifying offer. And I want to be clear. Like I've kind of, done some asking around on this. This does not like, and this is actually like Dom Barlow is still considering the Spurs. I'm not saying that like it doesn't preclude him resigning with the Spurs or anything. Obviously it doesn't, but like Dom Barlow is still considering re-signing with the Spurs. Like it's not like they're out of the mix here entirely. They still might end up with Dom Barlow at the end of the day. But I think Dom Barlow is too good of a player to just give up any rights that you have to him at the end of the day. He averaged 24 points and 8 rebounds in the G League this year as a 20-year-old. He is a athletic, like 4-5 hybrid who I think like projected quite well as like a third big, like next to Wembanyama particularly. I'm not sitting here saying this is the biggest deal in the world. I'm not sitting here saying that like this is something that's going to like tank the San Antonio franchise or anything. I don't want to, overstate and overreact to what this is. But if Don Barlow was a 2024 2024 draft prospect, right? And him having literally just turned 21, I think he's younger than like half of the first round picks that were picked this year. He would be a first round projected talent. Like he would be a top 30 player in that class. And my read on this is that the Spurs did this like as a favor to Barlow and as a favor to his representation, just in order to like, hey, go explore what's out on the market, like, see what your value is, right? But I think he's too much of an asset to do that with, frankly. I think he's actually like quite good, and I didn't love that decision.
Yeah, I was trying to look like maybe there was a roster crunch thing here, but they have enough non-guarantees. Like that's definitely not it. I was just checking my notes from this past year. I had some really positive stuff on him on both ends of the floor. Some good defensive possessions here, some soft touch here. Like it just, like you said, it's a team, especially in the stage the Spurs are in, that not kind of betting on that young talent and growth. It seems kind of weird. I will say this, and I don't know these things at all. I tell people all the time, I have no intel. I don't play that game. I don't even try. If this was a favor to Barlow, then I respect it. Like I kind of like, I don't know. I have a soft spot for teams who just quote unquote do right by players. Although I still understand it's a business and it's like, yeah, I want to do right by Don Barlow, but dude, you're pretty good and we don't want to lose you. But if they would, like, I kind of respect the conversation of, hey, we'd really like to test things out. And San Antonio going, you know what? We get it. We're here if you want to come back and you don't find what you want on the market. I understand that. I kind of respect that in a way. I just, like you said, I think there's too much potential there to just not be like, no, we want you here. Don't go. Like we just will keep you. We value you. We'll find minutes, whatever. Maybe that's the thing. Is it a minutes thing with Vic and Collins, Sohan back at the 4? Like, surely they can find minutes for him though. Like it's not a minutes crunch thing.
Yeah, look, like I don't know if I want to, like I just don't know like what the Spurs are doing there. And look, again, like I don't want to belabor this, but if I'm the Pistons, if I'm like the Nets who seem to be pivoting into a different direction, yes, I would do. Look, I would at least do like a 2-year, $8 million contract with like the second year being a team option and find out what Don Barlow is.
Yeah,
because it sounds like a lot for a guy that hasn't played many NBA games, but I would be very interested to kind of learn what he's willing to accept and find out. And yeah, like, a lot of people have brought up, like, maybe they just like Mamukelashvili versus Barlow. And like, I'm interested in Sandro. Everybody on this, listening to this show regularly knows that I love dribble, pass, shoot bigs. Like, I think that they are so critical to what you can grow and develop in today's NBA and how you can play offensive basketball that makes sense within the modern confines of the league. I would rather have Barlow. I would. I get it. I get it if you think differently, but I would just rather have Barlow than Mamu. Okay, a few other things that we want to dive into here for sure. Toronto has kind of secured its future. At least there are 2 guys that they're going to be paying quite a bit of money to. They have given Scottie Barnes a max level contract, and that can be, an enormous amount of money, or it can be, the normal 25% max. It can either be the 25 or the 30% max. They've given him that language. And then the second deal that I want to talk a little bit more about is the Immanuel Quickley deal, 5 years, $175 million, that we alluded to earlier in the show. Scottie Barnes max deal, obvious, right? Like there's no reason to break it down. You had to do it. It was he's the franchise guy there. You just give that guy whatever he asks for, or whatever the most you can give him is coming off of his rookie scale deal, and you go. Immanuel Quickley. Whenever I would bring up like how much money Immanuel Quickley was going to get in free agency, I kind of got yelled at by people saying, like I said, he's going to make at least $25 to $30 million a year, because that's what the number is. I remember Fred Katz like wrote a thing in The Athletic, probably before he got traded. It was probably in like December recently. And it was like, yeah, the average was like 400 when he asked like, different general managers and things like that about what he would get. And it's just like, guys, no, he was always going to make more than this. He was always going to get up around like $30 million in all likelihood, because the comps are the comps. Tyler Hero and Jordan Poole, in my opinion, are worse players than Immanuel Quickley. You can argue about Tyler Hero, whether or not he's like the same level as Immanuel Quickley. I'll listen to that if you want to argue that. Like, I think that's completely reasonable, but I would rather have Quickley than Hero at the end of the day. It's not a surprise that he would get this crazy amount of money. It's just not, because the Raptors gave up OG Anunoby to get him.
Yeah.
They didn't do it to go get RJ Barrett. He was the asset in this deal. He was always the guy that they were going to get. He was the guy that fits really well next to Scottie Barnes as like the, guy who can play both the 1 and the 2, which means you can let Scottie play on the ball and you can have Immanuel like floating as like an off-ball creator or as the on-ball pick and roll dynamic playmaker. This was always going to happen. Now, is he worth $35 million a year? He needs to like take some pretty real steps forward to be worth $35 million a year. He's a really good defender. He is like a real shooter, but in terms of his finishing around the basket, I think that he showed some flashes a little bit more as the season went on as a passer in Toronto, but he needs to keep growing as a passer as well. So yeah, to me, this is just this is what the going rate is for these guys. And, hopefully it works out. It's really what you're hoping for. Hopefully Immanuel Quickley is able to keep growing in the ways that he needs to grow.
I mean, I think the most important thing with these is what you said about he was the asset in the OG trade. And, I'm on Spot Track right now looking at, and these are just free agent deals. These aren't extensions. The top 3 money-wise by far in total value and really by annual value, OG Anunoby, Pascal Siakam, Immanuel Quickley. All of those have in common that they were the asset in a trade. And whenever you're the asset in a trade like that, you're not going anywhere. How bad would it look if the Knicks let OG Anunoby go sign with the Sixers this offseason, or let the Pistons outbid them for OG Anunoby after they traded all these assets for him? Same thing with Quickley, same thing with Siakam. Like, I just don't think it was realistic that these guys were ever going anywhere after these teams gave up for them what they gave up for them. So, I think the other part is, we mentioned it earlier when we were talking about the Suggs and then referenced Quickley, we just have to wrap our minds. And I'm not there yet. I asked somebody about percentage of the cap. Like, I would like to see the average percent of the cap for number 1 options, number 2 options, 5th starters. I think that'd be really, really hard to do. But this is what these guys are going to get paid. I'm with you. I think, what he averaged, he averaged almost 7 assists in his 38 games with Toronto. If that holds up, if the defense is good, that's whenever this starts to make sense. But I don't think there was any way you don't just pay him. There's no way.
Yeah. So Immanuel Quickley is going to be the 15th, most paid point guard in the league this season.
There you go. Yeah.
Right next to Drew Holiday. Dejounte Murray, $1.5 million or $2 million behind. Jalen Brunson, he'll go up at some point and his deal will spike. Trying to think here if anybody else will like spike above this. Cade's deal the next year will spike, right? So he's going to be basically like the 17th highest paid point guard in the league at some point. Like, that's probably what his ceiling is, like something like that. So yeah, like that lines up to me.
Yep.
Okay. It's kind of just what, I guess, like, it's what you have to pay at the end of the day if you're going to go acquire Immanuel Quickley. And by the way, this is why at the end of the day, the Knicks felt good moving Immanuel Quickley, because if you have Quickley and you're going to pay him more than Jalen Brunson for this year, that's probably not an ideal situation.
Yeah. I mean, they're paying $7 million on average more for OG Anunoby now.
Yeah.
And they got, and they had moved the Randall money as well.
if they can, or if they want to even.
Sorry, not Randall. Barrett. Excuse me.
Barrett money.
They're not paying RJ Barrett as well. So like between Quickley and Barrett, that would be more than what they're paying OG right now. Sorry, I misspoke there.
Yeah, the Knicks just stay very good at this. And look, like Stefan brings up, the RJ Barrett has been quite good with the Raptors. Sure. Like I agree. Like I don't. It's not a slight on RJ.
No.
Like it's been fine. Yeah.
I wasn't trying to take a shot at RJ. I was just saying money wise, how it all would balance out.
Yep. Okay. Other deals that have occurred. Do you want to talk about the Cade Max real quick?
Sure.
Yeah, just like obviously what they were going to do. They're giving, I don't know if this is 100% done yet, but the Cade Max is like occurring at some point.
My understanding is there's still some things. Yeah, but it's going to happen. It's imminent, I think, is the word. And then I think even if you read closely to Sham's tweet compared to Bobby Marks' tweet, like just the way the wording was, but Amari tweeted it out as well. Like I can't imagine all of these guys are going to be wrong. It sounds like he's going to sign it whenever he can. And yeah, it'll be, they didn't have it again. Like you give him this and you run with it.
Yeah, look, we don't know 100% that Cade is like a number one option for.
We do not. I would agree with that.
I do feel like he's going to at least be a number two. Number twos coming off of their rookie scale deal, having averaged what Cade has done so far, they get this money. If he's a number one, this is still a bargain. Like if he's a number two, we'll see. But they had to pay this. This is just the way that they were going. That they had to pay it, because, and part of the problem with what Troy Weaver did building this roster is that we don't know if Cade is the guy yet, because he didn't put him in position to find out if he was the guy.
Yeah.
Like we don't know. So they have to go into this a little bit blind and pray. And that's where bad decisions can occur, is when you have to go in a little bit too blind and end up like kind of praying for this.
Cade averaged 23, 7.5, and 4 on 45, 36, 87. I know those numbers don't blow you away. They're all massive improvements over the year before, where he only played 12 games, and then his rookie year. He got better. Like that was my thing. And just some context, like everybody knows the Pistons only won 14 games. They were one of the worst three-point shooting teams in the league. They were 29th in makes, 26th in percentage, 28th in turnovers. There's no floor spacing. Yes, Cade turned the ball over a lot, but somebody like Jalen Duren averaged 2 turnovers a game. Asar Thompson, for not very much usage, turned the ball over a lot. This was just a roster that made very, very, very little sense. And Cade still put up some pretty impressive numbers while doing it. To me, he has shown enough to warrant this, take this bet, even though I would agree that I couldn't say with 100% certainty he's going to be a number one. The biggest thing that has to come out of this offseason is has a roster around him next year to answer that even better. I mean, you're already going to pay him, but let's find out how good he can be.
It's a risk. It's a risky deal that you had to do at the end of the day. You have to pay this money to find out. There is a chance it blows up a little bit in their face, but you had no other option at this point, unfortunately. Sure. Okay. The other risky deal that I think occurred that raised some eyebrows was Pat Williams to the Bulls for 5 years, $90 million. I thought this was a pretty crazy contract, to be honest with you. I am like somewhat interested in Pat Williams. I think Pat Williams is a better defender than what he gets credit for being by a lot of people. I think that if you look at the last 2 years, particularly, I think he's like really taken a leap on that end. He guards like big dudes that are very difficult to guard and does so really well. I think he's a pretty good help defender. If you look at like the EPM based numbers, like he's a quite good defender. I am in on Pat Williams on that end. I have not seen anything really from him on offense yet as like a playmaker, dribbler, creative mind. He can make threes, but he doesn't take enough of them for it to like really matter. I haven't seen enough from him on offense to warrant this money at this stage.
Yeah, I thought it was a little higher than what he would get as well. I saw some people like, oh yeah, this is what it was going to take to keep him. I wonder if Chicago was nervous about the market, about a team like, Detroit or something that would come in and offer him more. But, then you just say, okay, well, now it's yours. Good luck with that. I was thinking somewhere a little closer to the Obi Toppin contract for Patrick Williams.
I was too. Yeah.
And then, maybe Obi Toppin wasn't quite getting what Obi Toppin got, so that's where both of those guys maybe, and Obi Toppin's thing, I don't mean to change subjects here, was more about, okay, you have Pascal, you have Jarris Walker waiting in the wings, like I would have had a ceiling for what I was going to pay Obi. Now I know something came out talking about Jarris Walker playing the 3. That's a whole other conversation. I guess I thought these guys would be a couple million lower each. And they came in a few higher than what I was thinking.
Yeah. And the other thing with Pat Williams is like, he has had quite a few different like injuries.
Yep.
Things pop up through his career. Like he had the foot injury this year. He had the weird dislocated like wrist thing back in his second season, if I remember correctly. So, you can take that one of two ways. Like this is a risk in terms of maybe he doesn't stay super healthy, or maybe it's a reason to believe in upside. None of these injuries have been connected to one another. He just hasn't gotten like real runway. Maybe you can see some upside there if he gets a chance to grow and get better. I just think that this deal could go one of two ways. Like it could be fine. Like there's a world where this deal is like completely okay.
100%, yeah.
It involves him getting better and growing on offense. The way, though, that you have to see that growth offensively is probably by getting rid of DeMar DeRozan, though. And I will be interested to see if Chicago is willing to do that, because where I've always felt like Pat Williams on the ball is most comfortable is getting into that like mid-range area and being able to shoot and being able to make that way and, find comfort there, because he's not super explosive. He's stronger. He has like these huge shoulders, right? He wants to bump and he wants to like be able to shoot. Not like wildly explosive around the basket, right? So I think this could work if he's like a 3-and-D, DeAndre Hunter-y kind of playmake, not even playmaker, just like shot maker at the end of the day. Maybe, but like we don't love the DeAndre Hunter deal either. And that's like at $23-24 million a year. It's not crazy more than what this is at like 18 a year. So I think they're paying top of the market value basically for a player that has hasn't shown that yet. Let's go with like this is what he should be getting. Like if he turns into what people think he is or think he could be,
or if he was shooting 6 threes a game as opposed to 3.5, because the 3-point percentage over the last 2 years is really good. I mean, the last 2 years it's at 41% on 3.5 attempts. So you're right there on the border of like you increase that volume and you can keep it at percentage. He doesn't even have to hit some of the other stuff quite as much. So like this, like I think what you said is right. There's a real chance this becomes fine. 4 or 5 years. Well, it's not going to be that far. What is it? 4 years from now? 5 years from now? 5 years from now.
So let's say it is okay, and he's worth 18 million in 5 years. You still paid because he's probably not going to be worth 18 this year. So you still in all likelihood paid a little bit more than what he was worth. It's just a bit of a strange deal. You brought up like the shooting, right? Like almost all of his threes, it feels like, are open threes. He makes 42% on unguarded threes versus 35% on guarded threes. Occasionally he can make like a pull-up 3 here or there. It's an interesting player type to give this much money to. And this is almost like a player that if I would rather give this money to him if I felt like I was close to a title, weirdly, because like I think he can defend, and like I think he'd be like an interesting upside swing to me on like a good team, more so than if like the Warriors wanted to sign and trade him for like Wiggins or something like that, because they like the upside of him and they think that like they can get something out of him even more defensively. And like, I would almost like that more than Chicago, which is in this like weird limbo state where we don't know what direction they're going to go.
Well, we've talked about this with Chicago and just not knowing where they're going to go. And, it's still fascinating because all of a sudden now they can't find a suitor for Zach LaVine. And even if they attach, and then DeRozan is still out there. So it will be interesting where they end up with that.
Yeah. I mean, right now their roster is like Josh Giddey, Bazelis, Pat Williams, Kobe White, Ayo Dosunmu, with obviously like the LaVine thing hanging over their shoulders and the Vucevic thing hanging over their shoulders. And like, I just don't. Yeah. I mean, that's definitely not a playoff team. Like that's just like a pure limbo, like bad team to me.
Yep.
Okay. Let's go to Indiana. They re-signed Obi Toppin to a 4-year, $60 million deal. Who do you think is more valuable, Obi Toppin or Pat Williams?
So that's what I was trying to go back and forth with. I want to say Pat Williams because I know Obi shot it well this year. Patrick has had a little bit more sustainable, and I think Patrick Williams is better defensively.
I think Pat's definitely better on defense.
And so with all of that considered, I'm trying to figure out where I would say, like, Obi's obviously way more athletic, right? And so maybe he fits Indiana better because of getting out in transition and all of that. Rebounding wise, there's not a whole lot of difference. I think Williams passes just as well. And again, the shooting profile is just a little bit more consistent throughout his career. So I find it hard to find the spot where I would say Obi is better outside of athleticism, transition, which could make him more valuable specifically to Indiana.
Yeah, I think that I like Toppin. I think Toppin will be fine on this contract in that location.
Sure.
Because they play in transition so much. He is such a good finisher above the rim. I think he's going to keep getting better as a shooter. Obviously he's continued to like weaponize his cuts as well. As he's gotten better as a shooter, it's become more that you have to play up on him a little bit more, at least like be cognizant of him, which allows his speed to really take advantage of things. In any other situation, I think I would like Williams better, but I do like Obi Toppin quite a bit in Indiana. Like, I think that this is a good spot for him to continue to be like what his best iteration is, which, look, like he's probably a third big at the end of the day. Like, that's probably what this is. It's probably who he's going to be. I think it's fine. I think like for a third big, $15 million, like is what it is. The number here, that Brian brings up in the comments is Pat is 3 years younger than Obi and has plenty of room to grow. Totally agree with that. And, I think that is a very real point that I was literally just about to bring up, that like Pat still has a chance to be better than Obi Toppin. Honestly, like I'd probably bet that Pat Williams is going to be better than Obi Toppin on some level. It's just like finding the right situation. Neither of them are so good that situation doesn't matter. And I think that Obi is actualized perfectly in his situation, whereas Pat Williams is still trying to find like what the situation is in Chicago, even, I guess. Like he needs guys around him that can like create advantages for him in order to get the most advantage, out of his skill set. And man, like it's just like kind of funky to me to try and like just I almost would like him more. Pat Williams, we keep going back to Pat. Like I would rather like him with like a distributing point guard who can create advantages and then kick out to Pat. Then Pat can like drive and go a little bit easier. I like this just feels like a not actualized situation for Pat, and it feels like a great situation for Obi, which makes me think that Obi will probably return slightly better value on his deal.
And of course, it's already a $3 million less per year on top of, everything else you talked about there. What do you think this means for Jarris Walker? Because that was my first thought. My biggest reason I thought maybe Detroit would have a chance to get an Obi Toppin and bring him in is because I thought maybe Indiana would be willing to let Obi Toppin walk at a certain price. And maybe nobody was going to offer this. But do you think does it mean anything for Jarris, or is it just Indiana saying like, hey, this is a guy that fits really well with our system on a quality contract. We're going to sign it and we'll just kind of figure things out from there.
Yeah, look, I don't think it means that much, if only because I'm assuming Jalen Smith is probably going to be playing elsewhere next year.
Yep.
And Jalen Smith playing elsewhere opens up like 17 to 20 minutes a game anyway. So if that's true, like assuming that ends up being the case and they don't retain Jalen Smith, I would assume that that's kind of the role Jarris steps into next year. More and like, look, we'll figure out what they do with Isaiah Jackson long term too, right? Like you could have Obi Toppin be like the 4-5 guy, and then you have Isaiah Jackson who played 13 minutes a game last year. So if Isaiah Jackson isn't there long term and Jalen Smith isn't there long term, that's like 25 to 30 minutes a game opening up as it is. So almost again, to the point that we talked about with Denver, I'm sorry about like having their young guys like being able to step into roles, but also letting them have like a backstop with KCP. I actually think that's what Indiana's doing. He's letting KCP they're letting Jarris grow into his game organically. And you hope that he jumps Isaiah Jackson this year and earns minutes, and then they can slide Obi down to the 5. And you hope that you can find different iterations where this works. But, I think that that's more where Jarris is right now. They're hoping that he can make that jump to that next point.
No, that makes sense. I like that in terms of, no, we're not going to let Obi walk. And then now Jarris has to be that guy for 20 minutes a night when he barely saw the floor as a rookie for a team that I would assume wants to, get back to the playoffs, obviously, and then make another run in the playoffs. So having that, like you say, that backstop for him if he isn't ready, but also the minutes opening up for him to do something in his second year makes a lot of sense. My initial reaction was probably a little bit of an overreaction in terms of, oh man, where are the minutes for him? What does this mean for him? Is there some underlying thing with this contract? So.
Yeah, no, I don't think it means anything. I think they're just like kind of taking this thing slow. Now, like some of the mid-tier-ish deals that we've seen, we're waiting to talk about Paul George until the end to see if like something, occurs, whatever, with Paul George in the 76ers or, any other team, I guess, potentially, but probably realistically the 76ers, given where this is going. Jonas Valanciunas, 3 years, $30 million to Washington. Yeah, this is just like another smart, hey, let's go get a big that will help kick ass for us, on the interior, will allow Alex Sarr to grow organically at the 4-5, and will set monster screens for everybody kind of along the perimeter.
I did have to laugh because somebody made a Troy Weaver joke about bigs, with Troy Weaver now being in Washington and Washington drafting Alex Sarr, paying Rashawn Holmes, what do you get? Like $25 million. And then Valanciunas got $30 million. So, but no, I think this makes a lot of sense with Valanciunas. I really like his game. I think I think what you said and multiple people, it allows Alex Sarr to not have to be do the dirty work, physical stuff in the paint as he grows into his game. But Valanciunas, doesn't have to take up all of those minutes, has a little bit of floor spacing to provide with that, whenever they're playing together. Obviously, it's not a ton by any means, but yeah, I like this for Washington. It's a little interesting for Valanciunas in terms of, wanting to go play in Washington. I don't know if there's a connection there that I'm not aware of or don't see, but I think for Washington, it makes complete sense with Alex Sarr.
Yeah, I think Jonas is now like kind of a really underrated offensive and like honestly like just an overall underrated regular season player. he is a really, really good regular season player. He is a great like bailout post option. He absolutely crushes the glass. Like any minute that he's on the court, he is going to dominate the glass on both ends of the court, frankly. You remember like in Memphis a couple of years ago, he averaged like 4 offensive rebounds a game and was averaging like 12 and a half rebounds in total per game.
Yep.
I think he's just like a really tough, like ass kicker that any like younger rebuilding team could really use. The other thing he is a killer screen setter. Like he just wrecks people on the perimeter. His issue is that like once you get into the playoffs, it's just really hard to make him work defensively in space. He really can't move anymore. And that's what New Orleans ran into. And I think that's probably why they didn't feel great about retaining him. But on this deal, like he's going to provide more value for them over the next 3 years than $30 million, unless he like gets hurt or something. Like this deal to me is like the most obvious. This will definitely provide surplus value deal so far. As long as, you know, he stays healthy and everything. It's just that it'll be in the regular season. But if you're Washington, you don't really care about the regular or the playoffs right now. You're not in that place.
Yep. I agree.
So yeah, this is a really good deal for Washington. I think this makes a ton of sense. Phoenix has decided to give Royce O'Neale 4 years, $44 million. Look, once they acquired him at the deadline, they were pretty pot committed to giving him real money.
Yep.
It was just the reality of it. At 31 years old now, do I think Royce O'Neale is worth $11 million a year? I don't. Like, do I think he's better than Naji Marshall, honestly, at this point? I don't. But they had to retain him. It gives them $11 million to potentially trade with at some point. And this is where we are. They're the only team so far, it feels like, that is unafraid of the second apron.
Yeah, no, that was my first thought as well. Is like they had to keep him based on where they're at. We've talked about this. Not all these contracts are created equal because not all these situations are created equal in terms of the assets giving up to get them, where teams are at with salary cap, losing a guy for nothing, all of those sorts of things. My first thought was like, oh, that's 4 for 44. That seems like a little much. And then it's not for Phoenix.
Yeah, no, it's look, in a vacuum. Yeah, it's probably a little bit more than he's worth, but this is what they had to do. They had to retain him. And look, their roster is coming together now. You know, they have obviously Booker, Beal, and Durant. Still have Yusuf Nurkic on the roster. They signed Mason Plumlee since we've been talking as well. I think he's actually like, it's really funny that we have the return of Mason Plumlee and Yusuf Nurkic playing together now after they were traded for one another in the Denver Portland swap to free minutes for Jokic originally. Having both of those guys, like, it makes sense because they can both like run dribble handoffs at a high level. They can both pass at a pretty high level. I really, really like, this. I like what Phoenix has done so far today within the limitations that they have.
Yep.
And then like Royce O'Neale, Grayson Allen, we'll see if they can go get, maybe you could do something with like the Nasir Little deal. Maybe you can go, shake things up like in a different way. Like, do you just believe in Mason Plumlee as a starter? I'm not saying that's a good idea, but like, could you go do Yusuf Nurkic for something else? I don't know. I'm just like spitballing on options that they have, but we shall see what this looks like as we go forward. Okay. Next, Max Christie, 4 years, $32 million to the Lakers. I think Max is going to be like a pretty solid player. He's obviously not worth $8 million right now. I liked Max Christie at $8 million a lot more for like a rebuilding team like Detroit.
I say this is almost the exact contract. I think you said if you were Detroit, you would throw 6 to 8, I think is what you said. Yeah. And just know you
324 was the number I said.
Yeah.
Yeah. So like, this is the number that I thought Max was going to get. He is a real potential 3-and-D wing. I know he hasn't like done a crazy amount yet, but he's hit 38% of his like 200 career 3-point attempts that he's taken in the league. He's an 80% free throw shooter. He's always been a shooter. He's shown real defensive strides. Look, this deal's going to go one of two ways. It's either going to be, a deal that works out great for the Lakers because he is on a bargain basement contract for 4 years, or it's going to look like they way overpaid him and that he just like can't play in the NBA.
It's going to look like the Zeke Naji deal that Denver gave him last year. It's going to
exactly the name that came to my mind too. I think you pay it if you're the Lakers and find out, because I don't think it's going to be that hard within the new collective bargaining agreement to get rid of $8 million deals. Like $18 million deals, I think those ones will be difficult to get rid of. I don't think 8 is going to be that hard to get rid of if it doesn't work out.
Yeah, I mean, it's super valuable. I still think it's worth the risk because now we've seen what Denver's had to do. They missed on Naji. So now what they had to do is they had to trade up in the first round to go draft a rookie to potentially fill the role that they wanted him to play that he wasn't able to. So is it worth $8 million to take a bet on Max Christie turning into a rotation player? And you know what the Lakers don't have next year, Sam? A first round pick, can that guy fill a role where you don't have to go out and trade second round picks to get somebody or take a first round pick on that position? You can take it on another position. $8 million is just so far below. I mean, that's the room exception. So like, it's just so far below what, these guys are making. You're right. Like getting off $8 million doesn't seem like it should be that hard if they just absolutely have to do it for some reason.
Yeah. Like let's say that at the end of year 4 here, Max Christie is not a like whatever thing, right? If Max Christie is not a real player, they'll have paid him like $19 million. And like, that's fine to find out in 4 years. If you think he had like a chance to be a 3-and-D guy, people make worse bets in free agency like every day of the week. And then you have 2 years, 32 million, or 2 years, 16 million left. I'm fascinated to find out if that last year is a team option. I would hope for the Lakers' sake that the last year is a team option. I can try and look that up while we're talking, but sometimes, these things get reported a little bit later. Actually, it's a player option in the last year. Jesus Christ, LA. Yeah, look, I just don't. I don't hate this deal. Look, I just don't think it's going to be that hard to get off of the money.
Yeah, it would be. Oh. If it was a team option, it'd be even better, right? Like then it's definitely worth it because then it's, like you say, it's 3 years and 24, just like you said. So it being a player option doesn't give them as much flexibility. But yeah, here's the other thing I'll say. I mean, I would like to think this means the LA sees something in him, is going to give him a chance and obviously sees him as part of the future as well. Nobody knows that better than them because he's been in their facilities for the last couple of years, training and doing his thing. So yeah, I'm kind of like you. I'm okay with it.
Yeah, I think it's fine. Okay. I've seen some people like crush that deal and I'm just like, seriously, that's the kind of deal that people crush that like to me has, I guess, some downside, but not enough to exceed the upside. Like if Max Christie is a real 3-and-D guy, those guys get like 20 million a year. And he'll be like a significant like value add to them in 2 years. But
I will crush it if they don't give him a chance. If they don't plan on actually giving him a chance, then I think then it's a stupid deal. If you have no plans to give him a chance to find out if he's a 3-and-D guy, if you don't see the path to minutes on the roster, then I don't like it. Then it is stupid. You should have let him go and just, give out a minimum contract and save the $6 million every year for the next 4 years. But if you're going to give him a real chance to hit, I think it's worth the chance.
What do you think? So here, I think Pat Williams is a better player than Max Christie. I want to say that up front before I ask this question.
Yes.
What do you think the odds are that in 2 years, Max Christie is a better player than Pat Williams?
10 to 20%.
Yeah, I think I would say like 25%. Maybe I'd say 25 to 30%, because I think Max is just like a way better shooter than Pat Williams is. Pat's a better defender, and like I think will always be a better defender. But like I would say like Pat Williams is probably going to be a better player than Max, but I don't know that for sure. I would say like 20 to 25% is where I'm at on that. And if you think that, then you just got Max Christie for half the price of what this is going to be. Yeah, no, I don't know. I think Max is really, really interesting. So people bring up like Pat Williams is a better shooter. He doesn't shoot. Like here's the issue. Pat Williams can be as good of a shooter as he wants to be. He needs to actually shoot the ball for it to happen.
We also very much highlighted his shooting, Sam. Like, I don't mean to like push back. I rarely do that with comments. I literally said that he shot 41% from three the last 2 years, how impressive that was. It was on 3.5 attempts. And if he would just bump the volume, then he more than makes up, or like, then he definitely hits what this contract is.
So like people bring up the idea of just bumping up volume like it's the easiest
it's
thing.
Not no 100%. It is not easy to do that.
Yeah.
Because the level
like DeAndre Hunter like wants to shoot 3 or 4 threes a game.
No,
I'm sure they would love him to shoot like 7. It's
because
just you can't get them off.
An increase in volume is an increase in difficulty. If he's going to go from 3.5 attempts to 5.5 attempts, those aren't going to be wide open attempts, because if he's taking that many and making it at the percentage, they're going to be even more difficult. So that means you got to do it off movement. You got to do it in contest. You got to do it in transition, coming off screens, or off the dribble. And I don't know which one of those I believe Patrick Williams is great at. Maybe the synergy numbers would prove me wrong. Maybe he's better off the dribble, off screens, and those things than I'm giving credit for. But you're right.
Took 15 threes off the dribble last year.
Okay, so like, I feel
matter.
It does not matter what the percentages are.
Yeah, so most of his threes come when they are like completely unguarded.
Yeah.
And he makes those when he's open. It's just the problem is you can only get so many of those opportunities per game. And if you are like, you're a fifth option at the end of the day. That's what it is. Like you are a fifth option. He is just not people will bring up, like, for instance, like I've seen people say like, he's not aggressive enough. I don't know that he's like capable of getting the shot up quick enough. I think that would be more my case. And that's improvable. Like that's a skill set that you can grow and get better at as you age. And that more to me than anything is the bet with Pat Williams. Maybe he can speed up the release while maintaining the, volume or the percentage. Right. But that's the hope. And like, somebody brought up, the gravity of Kobe, Io, and Modest will leave him open. No, it won't. Like Modest is 3 years away from doing anything on the ball in the NBA. Ayo Dosunmu, we love Ayo Dosunmu on this show. He'd be like the worst second option in the NBA, right? Maybe the second worst behind like whoever you want to say Detroit's is.
I was gonna say I ran into this the other day. I asked somebody, I said, who's the Pistons' second best scorer? And there was a long pause. So no, listen, I feel like we gave Pat his due credit as a shooter. And we're very much saying he's way better than Max Christie right now, and giving him an 80% chance of being better than Max Christie 3 years from now. I think the point was the money difference and if what Max Christie could be. And neither of us, I think, are any sort of sure thing that Max Christie actually turns into a 3-and-D player.
Yeah, I think that's right. Okay. The Miami Heat re-signed Kevin Love to a 2-year, $8 million deal. Sure. That's going rate for a, third or fourth big realistically. And I think Kevin can be more than that. So yeah, sure.
I mean, yeah, if they weren't going to find a way to replace him, then I think that makes complete sense. I think I talked about this with Kevin Love, just in terms of how many minutes, even at age 35, he played for them last year. So I get it. Spaces, the floor for them a little bit, plays at the top of the key. Yeah, I get it.
Luke Kornet and Nimi Queta back in Boston. I don't know that we need to say anything there. We didn't talk about Anunoby's 5-year, $212 million deal getting done. That was just like obviously getting done. We talked about the fact that it was in all likelihood getting done on the draft shows. I don't know that I feel like super inclined to talk wildly about it.
Yeah. No, I mean, I would have been disappointed if he didn't. After the Bridges trade, I was even more inclined that they needed to keep that, because that duo is what makes that trade, those trades and all the assets you gave up for those two guys exciting, is having both of those guys.
Yep. Final things to talk about here. Philly and the Clippers. The Clippers have brought back James Harden, 2 years, $70 million. They have announced, the Clippers have announced that Paul George will not be back, basically.
So weird.
I don't know if I've ever seen a statement like this. Shout out Young Mizuk. I always just know him as Ohm. Charlie should have figured out the last name before I went for the pronunciation guide. But yeah, look, this thing is done. It looks like, Paul's informed us that he is signing his next contract with another team, according to Lawrence Frank. Paul's tremendous talent and an elite two-way player. We feel fortunate for the 5 years we spent with him over that span. He went to 3 All-Star games, made the most three-pointers in franchise history, and helped lead the team to a place it's never been, yada, yada, yada. So that's where we're at. He's not going back to the Clippers, which is bizarre. Let's go. I have no idea why they're not willing to go 4 years on him. You have to keep him if you want to do anything. And to me, what this is just setting up as, they're not going to be good enough to compete without Paul George. So this is just setting up as like them moving Kawhi like in February or next summer or something like that, right?
Yep. Yeah. I don't know. I wasn't expecting this. Like, I just assumed that it was going to get done. I have no idea where what does that team do now? Like, what's the play? Kawhi,
no, I actually
enough.
Don't know. I truly don't know what their play is, what their move is. You can't lose Paul George for nothing. Like, you almost have to hope that he doesn't choose Philly now. But Philly's the only team that like has the space. And then on top of it too, there were reports that came out over the weekend that the Warriors like offered them for Paul George, and like they would have done something like Wiggins and Chris Paul and sent those guys back so they could have kept the salary space open potentially. And then moved like Chris Paul for another star or something like that. Maybe you move Chris Paul for Zach LaVine or something. Then you have LaVine, Wiggins, Kawhi and James Harden. I'm not sitting here telling you that that's like some incredible team or anything, but it's better than what they have now. Yeah, but that ship has sailed because Paul had to opt into his deal to be able to do that with Golden State. So yeah, no, I don't get this really at all. Like maybe, I mean, like another name that I've seen floated is DeMar. Like obviously you bring DeMar back to LA. I'm sure he would be happy to do that, but I just don't, I don't know. Like to me, DeMar is, Paul George was a top 20 player in the league this year. People like to like make fun of Paul George, like do whatever, but the reality is that he is an unbelievable two-way player. Like what they said in their release is not wrong. If you look at like any advanced number, anything like that, Paul George was a top 15 to 20 player in the league this year. Losing him and him going to wherever, Philly, we'll talk about Philly in a minute here. Maybe it's, somewhere else. It's just not, you can't really come back from that, in my opinion. No. Like them getting DeMar, they're not a contender to me if they have DeMar.
Well, the defense isn't even close to what you thought whenever you put this thing together with Kawhi and PG and obviously James and, like now it's just Kawhi and you have Harden and DeRozan defensively. Like I don't know how we got here. I'm sure we'll find out a little bit. I guess I said earlier that this is how these contracts get done whenever you trade real assets and move heaven and earth to get somebody. Like they moved heaven and earth to get Paul George so they could get Kawhi. And Paul George and his representation probably thought we'll just ask what we want and they're going to give it to us because their owner makes a ton of money. They have a new arena coming. And like, this is the ultimate like leverage Paul George, I would have thought, to get whatever he wanted. And the fact that it's not actually going to happen was not something I expected. Like I never considered him an actual free agent. I assumed he was always going to go back, especially after Kawhi signed his. So this took me off guard for sure, Sam.
Yeah. Like, look, I get that Paul didn't play super well in the playoffs. I get it that, he can be frustrating or whatever, but the guy was an all-star this year, rightfully, in a loaded Western Conference, who averaged 23 points per game, shooting 47, 41, 90 from the field.
It's not bad.
Yeah, while playing very high-level defense, too.
Yeah.
To me, this is like a catastrophic loss for this Clippers little run here, and now they're going to have to figure out what to do. Oh, by the way, now here come the 76ers in the wings. It was reported a while ago that like the 76ers, were bowing out of the Paul George sweepstakes. That was weird to me, but like whatever. Paul George, like they're the team remaining unless it's Utah or Detroit, right?
Yeah.
Look, we're not going to sit here and tell you like Paul George is going to the 76ers. I don't know. Maybe he will sign in Utah. Who knows? But like Paul George to the 76ers has always been, if he's going to leave, the team that makes the most sense to me. You could have maybe pitched me on Orlando a little bit, but I always thought that the 76ers being able to put him as like the third option on their team behind Joel and Tyrese just made like a crazy amount of sense to me.
Yeah, that's a trio, man. Like on a given night, Tyrese Maxey being your third option if Paul really wants to go. I mean, come on. Here's what I love about those, and we've talked about this with how OKC built out their roster, is those guys just fit so well together. There's no overlap whatsoever with those guys positionally or anything. Like I just feel like there's a lot of cohesion between all of them, plenty of floor spacing. Like good luck. You can put, almost anybody you want with those three. And that's where I would be. It's just like, okay, how else can they build this around now? Because I mean, now we talk about how weak the East is. I know you have the Celtics there. Who else can you recruit to come play with these guys, feeling like you're in the East? All you have to do is figure out how to beat the Celtics. I know that's not easy to do. And that's what I will say. They'll have to build this thing out still, because as we saw with the Knicks, and I should give the Knicks a little bit more respect here, more than I am, is you better go get some wings to guard the Boston Celtics as well. So they better they can't just fill out this thing with like floor spacers or something like that. You have real good floor spacing with your 3 stars. What wings are out there that you can bring in that are going to be able to defend that Boston roster whenever you would meet them wherever in the playoffs? So that would be the next step. I mean, I realize I'm jumping the gun here and just assuming it's a Philly. I'm trying to connect the dots here. It doesn't make sense anywhere else in terms of cap space unless there is a sign and trade. So that's where I would look now, is how can they fill this thing out and really, really be competitors with the Celtics and trying to get to the NBA Finals.
Yeah, and do you know what the crazy thing is about this too, by the way?
The draft pick situation?
The draft pick situation.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
The 76ers own the Clippers 2028 first round pick, and they also have the 2029 Clippers first round pick swap from the James Harden deal.
Yeah.
So we're now sitting in a circumstance where by signing Paul George, they are bettering their asset pool of potential options to trade and potential to just like draft those guys there with those 2028 and 2029 swaps and picks. It's pretty wild. It's pretty wild.
Because like I would assume the Clippers are going to try to manage this thing for a couple years. I mean, going into the new arena, they're not going to sell out this summer all of a sudden and change course. So they're, even if they were going to bottom out at some point, it's not going to be in the next couple years. And then these guys are going to get older, and Harden and Kawhi, are they happy? Do you have to trade them? Those picks could be really valuable. And, you know, probably for Philly, not even them actually take those selections, but use them as trade assets, you know, like we've talked about with the Phoenix picks, the Nets picks that now they get back. So, yep, it ended up being a really good trade for Philly with the Harden deal.
Yep. And look, I just don't know, you know, who they're going to be able to get. We'll talk about that maybe a little bit more substantially whenever a Philly deal potentially goes down. You know, if it does go down, we shall see. But I was hoping that maybe it would be done by now, but it seems that it is not. Yeah, I mean, look, this is, we'll talk about this more if it actually goes down and what this means moving forward for the Sixers, but it's a big win. It's a big win for them to even be in this, you know, position where you could have this in a way. Yep. Okay. I think that that's every deal that has actually occurred to this point. I think that's every single one.
Yeah, I was gonna check Spot Track real quick.
The last question I have for you.
Claxton. We didn't talk about Claxton, did we? Have you already talked about
We talked about him on the draft show.
Okay.
The last question I have for you.
Okay.
What is Detroit doing with its cap space?
Trades is my guess.
But who? Like that's what I'm struggling. It's just like trying to figure out, like, to me, Atlanta still lines up. Like if you wanted to take like DeAndre Hunter off of Atlanta's books for some sort of draft capital, like that to me is still a move that gets them like out of like a tax potential situation. And like, I'm sure that they're just going to try and get teams out of the tax, right? Like that's the goal here.
I listen, Trajan said it at the introductory press conference. They weren't active today, or if they were active today, they weren't able to seal the deal.
You know what? Atlanta doesn't even work because the Dejounte deal got them out of the tax.
So they don't have the tax implications anymore.
Yeah. So like that doesn't even track for me.
I feel like we're probably set up for a Tobias Harris reunion. If I had to guess, seems to make sense and track based off things and trade. I don't know. I've scoured teams to find like who is the guy that's still a quality NBA player that's just getting paid too much, right? Because again, I don't want another Joe Harris situation. So who are the guys that are they just cost their teams too much for their production, but would make sense for Detroit? And I've kind of struggled finding those guys because ideally they play defense and space the floor. They have to be able to do one of those things or the other. And I don't know. I've struggled. So, but
yeah, is that a Buddy Hield spot?
I mean, it could be. I said I thought maybe that's less likely after the Hardaway Jr. Like obviously Hield's a different stratosphere of shooter.
Yeah.
So bringing him in to space the floor makes sense. But now you have two complete non-defenders. I don't know. I have no idea, Sam. I told someone today, they were like, asking me as a guy. I said, I'm not even going to have any expectations for how this goes. I have no idea. At least they hired a coach.
Maybe you could take Maxi Kleba off of the Mavs hands as well if they do the Klay Thompson deal.
Okay.
Maybe it's Wiggins. Like maybe it's Andrew Wiggins. Like
we've talked to Wiggins State. Yeah. That just has so many years on it.
Yeah. It's actually really, really hard, I think, to find the like asset that is distressed. Like like somebody brought up like DeAndre Ayton maybe, but like
so somebody brought up Ayton to me as well. I think
the Brogdon deal got them out of like the crazy tax situation.
Like
So
the deal the team that makes sense to me for Jalen Duren is actually the Memphis Grizzlies. I just don't know what, like, if they would value that enough and what they would want to send back in a deal like that. And that the thing with Detroit is somebody's going to have to get sent out whenever they bring these guys in too, because then you just have a bunch of guys on top of each other. So like they said they want to bring in rim protection. So who, insert name, but then is Duren going to come off the bench? Is that guy going to come off the bench? Stewart needs to be more of a 5. Well, is he your third center now making $15 million a year? I don't know how all of the different pieces end up fitting together.
yeah, like I just don't. Memphis isn't going to do that.
No, I agree. No, I don't think that there's
Yeah.
I don't think there's a deal either. Like I don't know. And I don't even know if they should sell. I don't know if they should.
Yeah.
I don't even know if they should sell off the young guys right now. I would love for them to put a real roster with a new coach around them and then find out, like have a better evaluation of them.
Is it like Nas Little maybe? Like maybe they just, but like they don't have any assets to send out, Phoenix. So like it's not them. Maybe it's Sacramento. If they try and like get involved in a star deal, maybe you take back like Duarte and like the Jalen McDaniels deal or something, like maybe
because
like $10 million from them.
That's what gets hard is the balance between a bad asset and a good asset. Just like, because I'm like, you know what, like Kevin Huerter would be interesting, but that's not like they're not just moving off of Kevin Huerter or Harrison Barnes or somebody like that. You know what I mean? I feel like a lot of the bad contracts have multiple years. So whenever we talk about these type of players, Zach LaVine, multiple years, injury concerns. Andrew Wiggins, multiple years. And again, like God bless it, whatever's going on mentally with him, like whatever that is. Like Jeremy Grant, I don't even know if Portland, like I don't know what Portland considers that. Like what?
I think they want to move him for value. I don't.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
A dump. Yeah.
And so that's what like it quickly becomes. Well, that guy's not actually a negative asset. So now you're Detroit giving up something to acquire that guy, and it's long-term money. I struggled to find the short-term contracts that made sense in this situation. And
yeah,
I don't love the longer-term contracts as much. Like the idea of Zach LaVine makes sense, but not with how many ever years are left on that deal and the potential injury history.
Yeah. The best thing we've come up with so far is Kleba. I feel like,
yeah,
if
like
they get
a stretch big like that.
Kleba. Right.
Yeah, no, I think a stretch big would make sense there. You could probably find the minutes within the current bigs to make that work.
Well, and if you're Dallas as well, like if you could get off the Kleba money, what if they did something wild like Kleba and Josh Green, and then they might be able to actually retain Derek Jones at that level too if you did that.
Sure.
Like that'd be like 25-ish coming off their books, 23 to 25. Like if you got that much off their books, I wonder if that would get them closer to being able to.
That's what Detroit should do. Detroit should threaten right now that they're going to overpay Derek Jones Jr. or Dallas can trade them Kleba and Josh Green, and then you'll have the money to sign him, and we won't. That's what Trajan Langdon should do. I like that.
Yeah, I mind that.
I like the idea of Josh Green. I mean, yes, I would be cool with that. That would be a move. You don't give out any assets in that. Done.
Yeah, I don't hate that. But it'd be contingent upon Dallas being able to retain Derek Jones. But like that's the whole thing though. Like everyone's saying like Dallas, Josh says like Dallas is out on Derek Jones. The reason they're out right now is because they don't have the mechanism to take him right now. And he has like a weird agency situation thing going on where he picked like quite literally potentially the worst possible time to change agents, which, weird in general, but whatever. Yeah. Like if you're Dallas, like, would you rather have
Josh Green?
It actually is like a real question. Like, would you rather have Josh Green or Derek Jones Jr.?
So that's what, whenever we got to the end of that, I'm like, is is Derek Jones Jr. actually worth all of that though? Like, why not just keep Josh Green and have Maxey and call it a day? So that might not be worth it for Dallas.
Yeah, I mean, it might not be, but I'm based on how important Derek Jones Jr. was for them last year and how much more they played Derek Jones than Josh Green last year. I would think they value him more than Josh Green.
Yes, correct.
Like based on their own behavior, I feel like they value Derek Jones more than Josh Green is the thing.
Well, that's what minutes per game, Derek Jones Jr., 23.5. So in the regular season, Josh Green actually played more minutes than him. In the playoffs, Derek Jones Jr., 29.4, Josh Green, 18.1. That definitely flipped in the playoffs.
Yeah. Look, I'm fascinated by the Pistons. The Pistons are like a big circuit breaker in this playoffs or in this offseason because they're the team that has a bunch of money.
Yeah.
So they're the team that like has the ability to do a lot of different things.
Because Orlando spent theirs.
Things. Yeah.
Orlando spent theirs. Philly, looks like is about to spend theirs. So what San Antonio spent a little bit. Utah and Detroit are the teams with real money left.
Yep. And Utah, might be trying to renegotiate and extend Lowry, potentially, who knows? So Jeff Alwine asks, what attached assets would make LaVine worth it? Like what would you take on? I think that we've gone like way around the bend on Zach LaVine. Zach LaVine is good at basketball. Yeah. Zach LaVine's like really, really good. If the Pistons wanted to take him, like Bobby Marks said that like they can't even get a team to take him with a first round pick attached. I don't know if they were willing to attach an unprotected first round pick. That's like a no brainer to me for the Pistons.
Yeah.
You might be able to turn around and trade LaVine in a year's time anyway, if he's healthy again.
And that's like, you have like 1 year and then that contract doesn't, then every year it's just a little less bad. Wish didn't have the player option on the end. And I've said this, I think somebody like LaVine makes sense in Detroit. I went on this big spiel the other day on a podcast, just on a Pistons one, about how none of these guys are in the roles they should. Again, I'll ask you this, Sam, who's their second best scorer on the roster right now?
You said Detroit?
Yeah. Is Tim Hardaway Jr. their second leading scorer if they went into the season with this current roster?
I mean, look, like I'm still a Jaden Ivey guy, so I would probably.
I'm a Jaden Ivey too. I love Jaden Ivey. Yeah. Don't get me. I'm going based off how he's been treated. Like maybe this will change. New coach, all of that, but I don't think Jaden Ivey should be your second leading scorer yet. I don't hate the idea of bringing in a bucket getting floor spacer to then let J.I. be the third guy, and then Asar isn't anywhere close to being a guy that has to score the ball a lot or anything like that. So I don't hate the idea of LaVine. It's just multiple years, but you give me an unprotected first. Now it's kind of hard to say.
Team?
It's kind of, from that team. And especially if I think DeRozan's going to LA, like it's just hard to say no to that, especially when the Pistons are at a pick negative moving forward. And Trajan has said that, we're looking for trades to acquire future draft capital. So I'm with you. Like unprotected first. Sure. I think Chicago getting like that, that's a lot just to get off LaVine, but
I wouldn't do that if I was them for what it's worth either. I'm just saying, like, if Bobby Marks is right and they've offered like a first to get off of him, if you tell me that I'm getting an unprotected first from the Chicago Bulls, I'm like, I don't know, that feels worthwhile to me potentially. But
like, what would it take for Wiggins? Like, is it more than Moody? Because that contract's not nearly as much as LaVine.
Yeah, I mean, it's like what, 2/3 as much as LaVine. I would guess that that's also like that's a first to me. Yeah. That they probably have to get rid of a first to get rid of that deal, I would say. For sure. And I would like, again, if I was Detroit and I, needed draft capital because I'm still down a first round pick somehow, how they have lost this many years in a row and they're still down that first round pick they used in the Isaiah Stewart deal is baffling to me. Yeah, if I was them, I would be willing to take Wiggins back for sure for a first round pick.
Yep.
For Moody particular, like if I could do Moody, I would do that. But like for a first rounder, I would do for sure.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. And I don't know if they're trying to either. Like I don't know if Golden State's like trying to get off of Wiggins in that way. I want to make that clear.
Yeah.
Okay. You want to get out of here, so let's get you out of here. There has not been enough action for us to withhold you.
Unless Twitter like froze like it did during the second round, it seems like things have slowed down a little bit here tonight.
Yeah, I think we have, which is good. It seems like I would guess Paul George like has potential to break later tonight.
Yeah.
So yeah, I would guess that it would be later tonight.
Yep.
Okay. Tell the people where they can find your work. Tell the people what's going on.
Yeah, at Motor City Hoops on Twitter. Just follow me on there, and then anything that I put out, any content, free agency breakdowns, anything like that, you'll find on Twitter. Do some stuff over on Substack. I have a Pistons podcast. If you want to listen to us talk about what the Trajan Langdon's going to do with cap space and the hiring of JB Bickerstaff, you can come look and listen to us over there. Otherwise, right here, Game Theory Podcast with Sam Vecenie.
Yep. I will be back either tomorrow or the next day with more on free agency. I don't know, what that's going to look like yet. We're still trying to figure out what free agency is going to look like this year. I'm hoping Paul George is signed by tomorrow, and if Paul George is signed, I will definitely go live. If Hartenstein signs, it would have to be like Hartenstein plus somebody else, or Paul George signs, or like DeMar goes somewhere or something like that. We'll figure all that out. Bryce, you are out until later this week, right?
I think I can do Tuesday night.
Yeah, we'll figure all of that out.
Yeah, we'll talk about it.
Different time.
Yep.
But yeah, I'll go with somebody else at some point tomorrow if necessary, if I have to, especially if it's Paul George to Philly. I'll get someone from Philly to actually come and talk about it, hopefully. Okay. That's what we've got here, though. I think that's all. Go to The Athletic. Go read everything I wrote this week. Wrote a crazy amount of copy and content and all of the fun stuff that, goes up over there. It's a crazy time of year, obviously. Draft stuff went up, all that stuff. I appreciate you guys reading. That's what we've got here. So let's call it. Until next time, we'll talk soon.